Okay, so it's 4 o'clock now. Here in the room, we have 3 people. I don't know how many online. Let me check.
We've got, let's see, how many? About 15 people.
I see. Um, our main presenter is here, Jordan Head. I think we can get started. I see that Alvaro is online, but Alvaro, are you there? He has been in the app for a while, but I don't know if he is actively there.
Let's give it 1, 2 more minutes.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we. Oh, yeah, he just walked in. Yeah.
Alvaro, thank you for fixing the network.
So, do we want to get started?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. Welcome to the Rift Working Group in IETF 114 in Philadelphia and online. Is note well. Please remember that by participating in the IETF, you agree to follow the IETF processes and policies. I'll just read that line. Everything else, just read. You should be already familiar with it already. Some reminders. Please wear masks in the meeting room. Please be courteous and professional. Also, please use the on-site tool, even if you don't plan to speak at the mic. That is the way to sign the blue sheet today, these days. You can do that. You can use the on-site tool either follow the link in the agenda or scan the QR code. Jeff, do you want to take from
Yeah,
here?
so agenda for today, we are going to provide quick update also with regards to rechartering and work we would like to progress. And then Jordan is going to talk about updates to the base spec uh, and the VPN KV registry. I think we reached good consensus with Ayana Fox here. And yeah, as I said, recharging discussion. Next slide. So Alvaro, thanks for your review. It came back, so we are working on it. Applicability statement is still pending. It is review. Young model was yesterday submitted to ISG. KV registry, as we said, we reached consensus with Ayana, and now we need Shepherd write-up, and Rift segment routing has been adopted as a new working group document.
So then the next presentation is from Jordan Head. Let me start load the material. One second.
All right. Okay. So pretty big change, or at least there will be pretty big upcoming changes for the base spec. Next slide. So with Alvaro's feedback that came back, here's some of the stuff that's going to come up is the major feedback would be some of the ASCII diagrams didn't exactly, they weren't parallel with their SVG counterparts. Now there aren't requirements for things to be exact, but they need to be at least comparable so that both formats of the document have roughly the same experience. Things like textual references and diagrams and so forth. Other clarifying changes to Next slide. Just a little bit of visualization for those that are interested. So what did I mean by not parallel? So the SVG on the left, pretty cool and so forth, but the two ASCII versions on the right, the top is the before and the bottom one is after it, more clearly reflects the point of, in this case, intertop of fabric rings on the fabrics. Again, the SVGs are kind of more of a should than a should. But again, it's about, it's an accessibility thing, right? They need to be able to read relatively similarly. Next slide. Kind of the same thing, right? There's just some inconsistent labeling, stuff like that. See the SVG on the left and the ASCII version on the right is a little more parallel.
I voted with Thunder. Yeah, one thing that came to mind just now is that the SVGs are, of course, nicer and easier to understand if I was reading the document. I don't know if we can put a note, maybe especially at the beginning of that first section, say, go look at the PDF type thing. Because most people are going to go look at the HTML version or something, and they might not get the benefit of looking at all the nice pictures.
Yeah, I know this was, when we were first doing the SVGs, it came into it was a whole thing figuring out what was allowed, what wasn't, grayscale versus color and so forth. We're not actually allowed, well, we were advised not to reference specific formats in the text at all. At least that's what I saw. It ties back to Geneva Convention sort of things. It's pretty interesting as far as accessibility and readability, and certain parts of the world may not have access to something that can render HTML properly, things like that. But yeah, so wanted to, but okay, next slide. Just kind of other stuff there. I know you mentioned we should request early allocation for the multicast addresses and the UDP ports. I'll make a note to the chairs, or I'll send an email to the chairs when we push version 16. Beyond that, various editorial things, readability, clarity aspects, some reference fixes, and I still need responses. So there'll be a couple of things that we'll have a little bit of a discussion about, but the vast majority of the feedback is super straightforward. Next slide. And there were some things unrelated to your review that I kind of noticed. Well, first off, I'll be added as the 6 co-author. Thanks for helping me wade through that. It'll require a minor Shepherd update, but AD's mentioned that that's a pretty straightforward thing. Did some minor fixes for the thrift schema with regard to what's already reflected in the KV draft. They just a little bit out of date there. Other SVG fixes, just size, scale things. Some of in the previous versions they scaled really, really poorly, and it was ugly. And other kind of SVG XML optimization, and that had to do with there's actually a 3 meg limit on the draft upload tool that caused all sorts of fun problems. We had to render the PDF version, and the PDF version doesn't render the SVGs very well. But anyway, so that now everything should kind of fall into, and they'll get the full benefit of the HTML version. I'm going to, well, we have a Git issue open with them, but hopefully there won't be pushback. So I might bug you depending upon things, but okay, next slide. I think that's it. Other questions before we move on? It's pretty straightforward. Okay.
I don't see a queue, so we'll just continue to the next one.
Okay, just gonna provide a brief update on auto flood reflection. Next slide. So just a quick refresher for those For unfamiliar, it's an experimental draft out of LSR, but the short version of it is, so, there are lots of reasons to use, flat single area IGPs, but they come with drawbacks, flooding, state, and convergence, right? Every node's got to know, hold that state, and then compute that state. So there's a link to the actual flood reflection draft, but we'll kind of circle in with Rift here in a second. Next slide. So flood reflection, like Rift, is very well suited for claw topologies. So Rift will take care of the underlay. And then the auto FR extensions will use, Rift's ZTP and the lie exchanges to build a flood reflection topology on top of that. So next slide. So where does it actually fit in? So flood reflection requires loopback addresses, system IDs for ISIS, network entity titles, which just makes the single address, and then a cluster ID to actually segment the flood reflection domains. And so AutoFR has to actually build and derive those variables using the distributed state we get in Rift. So next slide. So what that really kind of looks like is, so Rift ZTP will, it'll drive each level, it'll build the Rift fabric. Next slide. The FSM will help derive all of the flood reflection roles and variables, and basically take what would be configuration data, and then next slide. And then finally, you end up with ISIS flood reflection on top of everything. So the adjacencies come up, you have the flood reflection topology, and there you go. You basically plug in everything, you have a whole fabric. Okay, next slide. So as far as the actual work in the draft, so there were some concerns with how, the ISO address derivation wasn't very clear where it came from unless you went in and looked at the thrift model. It's there, but it should be kind of aligned in the text as well. The kind of did a new section, refactoring of sections for all of the extensions required to Rift to let AutoFR work. So that would be, the finite state machine, node tie advertisements, and kind of any applicable schema updates. Basically, prior to kind of refactoring, it felt a little disjointed. You had to bounce around the draft to figure out what was doing what. So more readable now. Next slide. Okay, we added a flood reflector preference value, which means we need to update the election procedures to factor that in. And then the key value ties are more of a just editorial stuff. So a little bit of normative language, and kind of, we've since reworked the draft just a little bit. So we've got the request criteria aligned. Okay, so next slide. Okay, just a little bit of a visual fluff, if you will, as to how what's clarified. So those are the functions that are tied to what are actually in the draft in the appendix that kind of show, here's how we derive it, and then these are the the individual functions that build the parts of the address that we need. So it's, that image isn't there, but it's described in text now versus not. Next slide. Right. So like I said, what it was before was, with things being so disjointed, we just put everything in a single section and said, here's the flood reflector version, the cluster ID, and the preference values. And there was a little bit of a functional change with that wasn't described before, to kind of factor in for interoperability with nodes that do run it, nodes that don't run it, nodes that do support it but don't want to run it, so forth. Next slide. So quick look at the actual reflector election. Previously, it was just highest SID, lowest SID, second highest, second lowest. That's basically to prevent any single node coming in from flipping the entire fabric and killing all the adjacencies. So it's the same concept. All we do is factor in preference now. So it's the same thing, but with highest preference value, and it will cycle through if you have enough flood reflectors. But okay, next slide. Like I said, for key value ties, lots of normative stuff. Basically, we made it say that you don't have to carry everything, but you probably should. And then like I said, the actual request component of it is aligned with what the key value draft says. Okay, next slide. So that's really it. We are requesting working group adoption for that one, but we'll add in some multi-plane considerations. I know that's kind of on a back burner for the moment, but that's really the gist. Any questions about AutoFR? Okay. Keep
All
going.
right. So adoption, it would need probably need the charter update
Yep.
to adopt it. Yeah.
No,
Well,
that's fair enough. Yep.
yeah. We'll talk about it at the end.
Okay. Auto EVPN, similar to Auto FR, but build EVPN topologies on that. But just quick update with this one. Next slide. So kind of similar to the Auto FR, these things were, we use this, the template for Auto FR, and then we noticed it problems. So similar structural changes made things a lot more clear and readable. So again, it was just feeling disjointed previously, and jumping around the document's never good. Similar stuff to the Auto FR with the key value ties as well. Some norm to language things, and IANA things were tightened. There was a little bit of a model change in that certain piece. Well, we'll come to it. And then editorial and nits and things like that. So next slide. Okay. So again, just kind of aligns with what we did with Auto FR. So the actual extensions just kind of more contained where they should be, as well as the actual behavior. This was never really spelled out before, and that version, fabric ID, the auto EVPN model itself actually has to be advertised in a node tie at least once in each direction. So again, it has to do with interop. And then there are kind of relevant complementary schema updates for that. Yep, next slide. Okay, so with the key value ties, the auto EVPN, the telemetry model we use to push upstate upstream, had a couple of things in the thrift model that have now since moved to its common model overall, so it can be used outside of it. So it's kind of just it's more of a cleanup thing, but it's an important one. The structure of that bit in common thrift also changed just a little bit, but again, that just aligns with the values that we're going to request from IANA for well-known OUI and experimental p-types. Again, normative language stuff, right? Don't have to do these things, but you should. And the actual requests of it line up. Next slide. Okay, same thing here. We are still kind of working on some of the data center interconnect stuff, so it'll basically be a different auto EVPN model to get traffic out of a fabric. More multi-plane considerations. We've got a lot of this stuff built in already, but there's some other implications we need to work on. And then some actual operational deployment considerations. Next slide, and I think that's it. Okay. Questions there?
Questions, comments? Okay, we'll move on to the next one then.
And this one will be fast. So key value structure just need a little bit of restructuring. So next slide. Might be the only slide. Nothing terribly exciting, but it's kind of worthy of an update. Going through the Shepherd review for the Yang model made me realize that this would not do well. So I refactored it to take into consideration all of the IANA stuff. Expert review requirements, guidance for them, registry structure as well. So like Jeff said, the Shepherd write-up's already in progress there, but next slide. So this may be a little bit of a question for AD, depends on what they want to do. I sent an email initially saying, or IANA had reached out to me. They did an early review actually before this and kind of said, well, you're requesting a registry from something that isn't there yet. There's no top level Rift category yet because it's requested in the base spec. I was thinking about already just, we'll move that request into this draft, but I changed my mind. I don't know if there's any benefit to it. We can just leave it in the main spec if it's not going to speed anything up. Yeah. So
Right, sorry. I saw your email, but I was a little bit confused because, yes, the registry doesn't exist. They have been doing, IANA has been doing recently, I think they started maybe this IETF, reviewing documents that they see on agendas. So they probably have never reviewed the base spec.
right. Yep.
Right, so they don't know that that is coming. So yeah, so no, you should just assume that that exists, because in any case, we're going to publish this after the base spec.
Yeah.
So by that
And-
time, yeah, it should be there.
Yeah, and I talked to him thinking, oh, maybe this will move along faster, but yeah, splitting hairs, right? So leave it as is. I'll correct the email. But I actually have to specify the Rift registry that I'm requesting out of. So very brief update to version 2, but literally since. Yep, Tony.
Tony P. Juniper. So the small question to Alvaro. So do you prefer us to stick the whole into one huge registry, King of Rift, or should we break off the Rift base spec registry and then the key values registries?
So I think what should happen is there should be one IANA page for Rift. And in there will be multiple registers.
Yeah. No problem. Okay, no, and that's it. So, no, that's all I have.
Okay, I think
Thank you.
that's all the updates we have. We just zipped through the presentations. Now it's coming to before we go to the next agenda item, do we have any comments, questions from anyone? Tony.
Tony P again. So just as update to community. So Jordan is pushing the newest version of the draft up because, we're basically breaking tools all the time, size-wise. A review is going on, and I am updating Bruno's open source implementation to the newest spec, which I already did. But there's one thing that Bruno was supposed to do, but he's incommunicado for the moment. So that will be done within the next week or two and tested against, Juniper implementation. So the open source implementation should be completely up to date within a week or two on the newest schema, et cetera, et cetera.
Thanks.
Jeff, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, so the last presentation for today's meeting is a charter discussion. So currently charter has a base spec, applicability statement, YAML model. All documents are in advanced state and progressing really well. Right, so we have adopted another number of items that kind of have in the charter, have not. So we would like to update charter to explicitly include all the work on key value registry and all the work where Rift is used really for bootstrapping stuff, so OTVPN, flood reflection. So segment routing is adopted, but again, not exactly in the charter. So we would like to include it. Multicast work has been stranded for quite some time, but we plan to restart working group potentially after next IETF, and we would like to include it in new charter as well. So it's there when we start. So we don't have any off-charter work for the couple of upcoming IETFs. Tony?
Yeah, so especially the multicast. I mean, the whole multicast was stuck on this last issue of the tree join at the top, right? And that was before the whole auto EVPN, auto flood reflection, which actually delivers a completely distributed, stable election at the top for, you know, whatever, 1, 2, 3 routes that possibly can be used to resolve this multicast dilemma on which the multicast at the end was stuck. And I think it's worth a push. If it doesn't, you know, if it's impossible to solve, well, I mean, no other IGP managed to solve it reasonably. If we manage to actually get this multicast working and merge it at the top, this will be a pretty big pop in terms of protocol design. So I just encourage, you know, more than happy to have a look and help with the stuff as well to give, you know, the one last look whether we can merge all these trees that we already figured out at the very top and get the whole solution working.
Yeah, I think there's a unique opportunity because of characteristics of protocol. It doesn't only distribute reachability, it also allows some bootstrapping, which other protocols don't do so well. So yeah, that's the idea. Any comments? Alvaro, what do you think? Looks like Alvaro left. Oh, sorry, you're here.
Yeah, it would be really nice if others in the working group had opinions, because it's important to get reviews and people to look at the drafts and everything else. Other than that, yeah, this looks good to me.
Great. So we'll send to the list proposals for update charter, start the discussion, and potentially go on. So next IETF, we plan to have an updated charter anyway. And we don't have any more items to discuss. So if no questions here, we can give you back 30 minutes. You can spend on something else, or maybe think about multicast in Rift. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And we will see you in London, hopefully.
Okay. Thank you.
Jeffrey.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.